At 11 o'clock on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. And that time is commemorated every year in Britain and across many Commonwealth countries, as we remember the nearly 1 million young men from the British Empire who died in the First World War. But have you ever stopped to wonder who fired the first shots in that war, nearly 4 years beforehand? This is the story of those first shots, plus the first officer killed in action, and the first British victory in World War I. And some of those events might just surprise you. Britain entered the First World War on the 4th of August 1914, after the Germans ignored her ultimatum to not violate Belgian neutrality. Just over a week later, on the 12th of August, the main body of the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, started to embark for the continent. Compared to the huge conscript armies of France and Germany, both of whom were throwing about 1 million men each into the field, the BEF was a tiny 80,000 men. The German Kaiser Wilhelm called them a contemptible little army. Maybe their size was contemptible compared to his huge army, but their abilities, as was soon to be proven, were far from that. Unlike their French allies and the German opponents, the British Army was made up solely of professional soldiers, and the countless colonial wars in India and Africa not only gave them better battle experience than most French or German soldiers, but had taught them valuable lessons too, not least in marksmanship. Whereas back in the middle of the 19th century, in campaigns such as the Crimean War, the British Army had relied on controlled volley fire to stop their enemies in their tracks. The Boer War in particular had given them a crash course in marksmanship. The British soldiers heading across the English Channel in 1914 could now hit a man-sized target at 300 yards, 15 times a minute. By the 22nd of August, they had arrived outside the drab Belgian mining town of Mons. As the BEF moved into position to stop the advancing German army, a cavalry unit, the 4th Royal Irish Dragoons, were ordered forward to attack a unit of German lancers. Formed back in the late 17th century, the Royal Irish, as their name suggests, recruited heavily from Ireland and had been involved in the Peninsular Wars, the charge of the Heavy Brigade during the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War, and the Battle of Tel el-Kebir in Egypt. The aim of their mission here in 1914 was to conduct a lightning strike, hitting the German lancers before they knew what was happening, grab some prisoners for questioning and get out fast. At 6:30 a.m, C Squadron of the Royal Irish Dragoon Guards carried out that order to the letter, in what was to be the very first British action of the war on the Western Front. The German lancers were taken by complete surprise, and as he led the attack, Captain Charles Hornby became the first British soldier to kill a German as he thrust his sabre into a lancer officer. The German lancers, who were chased by the dragoons, finally turned to face their British opponents, and casting their lances to one side, they opened fire instead. As the Irish cavalry wheeled away to head back to safety, Corporal Edward Thomas fired back, hitting a German officer. No one seems to know whether that German officer was wounded or killed, but Thomas is credited with firing the very first British shots of World War I. A day later, the British fought the Battle of Mons, the first major battle of the war, and the long war had started. And yet, neither Mons nor the charge of the Royal Irish Dragoons was where we saw troops of the British Empire going into action for the very first time in the First World War. Neither was it in Belgium, where the very first shots were fired by a soldier of the British Empire. For that, we have to travel 4,000 miles south to West Africa. The First World War was not just a European conflict. It also pitted the German Empire against the Allied empires in both Asia and Africa. During the 19th century, the European powers had participated in an unprecedented land grab in Africa, known as the Scramble for Africa. Whilst there were moments when the powers squared up to each other, for the most part the division of this huge continent had been conducted in an almost gentlemanly manner. Well, when I say that, gentlemanly between the European powers, not necessarily for the Africans, following a conference in Berlin in the 1880s. And whilst the key beneficiaries of this scramble for Africa were Britain and France, the new kid on the block, Germany, had also attempted to grab herself a place in the sun, establishing colonies in East Africa, now Tanzania, Southwest Africa, Namibia, Cameroon and Togoland. Togoland was squeezed between the British colony of Gold Coast and the French territory of Dahomey, modern-day Ghana and Benin, respectively. Slightly smaller than Ireland, this colony stretched 360 miles north to south, and was about 100 miles at its widest. The geography ranged from palm-lined beaches in the south through swamps and jungle, high grass and dense scrub. The Germans, who had established a protectorate over the region in the 1880s, had built roads and railways leading to the interior. With an average temperature of 28 degrees Celsius and a humidity running at around 86%, Togoland was about as far removed from the trenches of the Western Front as you could possibly imagine. Economically, it had little value to either Germany or the Allies, and strategically, it served no useful purpose either. Or at least, that was the case until a few weeks before the war broke out. In June 1914, literally about 8 weeks before the First World War broke out, a huge wireless station finally went live at Kamina, about 60 miles inland from the capital of the colony, Lomé. Its 9 antennae, towering up over 100 metres, had a range of nearly 4,000 miles, suddenly making Togoland, or at least the wireless station at Kamina, the linchpin connecting Berlin to her colonies in Southwest and East Africa and their ships throughout the South Atlantic. When war broke out on the 4th of August 1914, both the governor and the military commander in the British colony of the Gold Coast were back in England on vacation. However, the temporary commander of the Gold Coast Regiment, Captain Bryant, decided to take the initiative. Captain Bryant was 34, he came from Leatherhead in Surrey, and he was from the Bryant matchmaking family. He was gazetted as an officer in the Royal Artillery in 1898, and by 1914 he had been seconded from the Royal Artillery to Africa, serving with the Gold Coast Regiment. The Gold Coast Regiment had originally been set up as a constabulary back in 1879, before becoming a British officered military regiment in 1901. Along with regiments from Britain's other West African colonies, Nigeria, Sierra Leone and Gambia, it formed part of the West African Frontier Force. In 1914, the regiment consisted of 7 infantry companies, 1 pioneer company and 1 battery of guns. Interestingly, whilst the senior British leadership in the Gold Coast were away on vacation as war broke out, so was the German governor of Togoland. Thus it was his deputy, Major Hans-Georg von Düring, who had to organise the German response. So this tiny campaign at the outset of World War I was presided over by standing commanders on both sides. Von Düring, nicknamed the Dragon on account of his fiery temper, did not have much of an army at his disposal. In fact, he didn't actually have a regular German or Askari army at all. Instead, he would attempt to defend Togoland, or more importantly, the wireless station, with just under 700 paramilitary police, or Polizeitruppen, plus 300 armed German colonists, all under Captain George Fahler. Just 2 days after Britain had declared war, the military in the Gold Coast intercepted a wireless message from von Düring, ordering his forces to abandon the capital at Lomé, which was just 2 miles from the border with the British Gold Coast, and fall back on the important wireless station. The following day, a small British party drove the short distance across the border to the capital to indeed find it deserted of German military. Captain Bryant now landed a force of 500 members of the Gold Coast Regiment at Lomé, and in the coming days they were joined by a French force advancing west from Dahomey. Bryant, now given the temporary rank of Lieutenant Colonel, took control of this Entente army as they moved inland towards the wireless station. On the 12th of August, just outside the capital, a detachment from the Gold Coast Regiment entered a factory, only to run into a patrol of German Polizeitruppen, who opened fire on them. Lance Corporal Alihaji Grunshi returned fire 10 days before the Royal Irish went into action outside Mons, thus making him the very first soldier in British service, though not British soldier, to fire at the enemy in World War I. As they advanced inland towards the wireless station, the terrain worked against them and the British and French force were obliged to follow the limited roads and railways towards Kamina. In an audacious operation, the Germans came back down the railway line towards the coast, shooting up a station in their travels. The Gold Coast Regiment tried to ambush the train on its return journey inland, and in a vicious firefight they incurred 83 casualties against 41 Germans. However, one of the German dead was the commander of the Polizeitruppen, Captain George Fahler, who was supposedly shot whilst climbing a tree to try and get a better look at what on earth was going on in the dense vegetation. On the 22nd of August, the very same day that the 4th Royal Irish Dragoons were going into action near Mons, Bryant's forces once more clashed with the retreating Germans in Togoland, on the river Tra. Having blown up the bridge, the Germans positioned themselves with their remaining machine guns on the north bank to stall the British and French advance. Some argue that the term battle might be too strong a term to use and that maybe the engagement should be called a skirmish. Well, battle or skirmish, it nevertheless was bloody. The British force on the day lost 17% of its number in casualties, including 23 dead. Amongst the dead was Lieutenant George Thompson, on secondment from the Royal Scots Guards. The 24-year-old became the very first British officer killed in action in the Great War. Afterwards, the British accused the Germans of using hunting bullets with soft tips against the terms of the Geneva Convention. Von Düring protested that he hadn't ordered their use, which in a legal way could be an admission that they had indeed been used, just he hadn't ordered it. Despite stalling the Entente advance on the river, when the German officers ordered their paramilitary force to launch a counterattack, they deserted, simply melting away into the bush. With French troops now advancing from the northeast and Bryant continuing his advance towards Kamina, von Düring and his dwindling army was facing the inevitable. For 3 weeks he had kept the wireless station operating, and during that time it had relayed 229 messages between Germany and her far-flung colonies and vessels. He now ordered the station to be destroyed. The antennae, the turbines, the electrical machines, the boiler house were all blown sky high, and the remains can still be seen to this very day. With the station completely wrecked, von Düring and 200 German Imperial troops surrendered to Bryant on the 26th of August 1914. The British had their first victory of the First World War. 3 days later they gained another when the New Zealand troops landed unopposed on the German colony of Western Samoa in the Pacific. By then, however, the Battle of Mons and the ensuing retreat had captured the headlines, and the Togoland Campaign, the exploits of Lance Corporal Alihaji Grunshi, the death of Lieutenant George Thompson, just became footnotes in that long, bloody war. So let's come full circle. On the 12th of August 1914, just 8 days after Britain declared war on Germany, Lance Corporal Alihaji Grunshi was the first soldier in British service to fire a shot in the First World War. On the 22nd of August, Corporal Edward Thomas became the first actual British soldier to fire on the enemy. And that was after Captain Hornby became the first British soldier to kill a German in that cavalry charge outside of Mons. And on that very same day, the 22nd of August, back in Togoland, Lieutenant George Thompson was the first British officer to be killed in action in World War I. What an incredible 10 days. Amazingly, in a war that over the next 4 years cost the lives of over 1 million British Empire servicemen, Hornby with the first kill, Thomas first British shots, and Grunshi first British Empire shots, all survived the conflict. The Gold Coast Regiment had proved their worth in Togoland and went on to fight in Cameroon and the long protracted war in East Africa against the Germans, led by Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. Having seen active service for nearly 4 years, they were finally sent home to the Gold Coast, Ghana, in July 1918. 200 of them had been killed in action, and a further 250 had died of disease. Alihaji Grunshi was one of the lucky ones. Fighting all the way through the First World War in 3 campaigns, he received the military medal and was mentioned in dispatches, and he finished the war with the rank of sergeant. Edward Thomas also survived the whole war. In an amazing career that mirrored Alihaji's, he received the military medal. He was mentioned in dispatches. And would you believe he finished the war with the rank of sergeant? It's fascinating how that golden thread of history connects people and events to each other, and indeed us, to our pasts. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that story of firsts from World War I. Lots more stories coming your way, including the Battle of Mons itself, and I also think I'm going to do a video about the East Africa campaign, which finally ended 2 weeks after the war in Europe finished. A lot of people don't know that. So make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss them. Until then, keep well, and I hope to see you very soon.